Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the introduction. As already been mentioned before, Cooling Singapore is the first intra-Create project, and I think we actually have a very nice representation of Create because we have the three major or the three biggest Create entities involved. The Singapore ETH Center is leading this project, and then of course there's SMART involved. And we also have TUM Create involved, and we also have NUS. So it's actually quite a nice, I think we have quite a lot of expertise here. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to give you an overview of the project and what we are planning to do mostly, because the project has started about 6 months ago, so I can't actually talk a lot about findings and outcomes because it's sort of in the progress. But I hope that at the end you have an idea of what Cooling Singapore is about and what we're trying to do, because in many ways it's not the, I would say not the sort of standard kind of academic project with a lot of focus on academic publications. The project is very much about policy, roadmap development, and Urban Heat Island Task Force and R&D roadmap. So I will talk about this a bit more later. Yeah, the urban heat island effect, I think I don't need to go into details. I think Les did a great job explaining this already. But one thing that I would like to highlight is that there's no such thing as a Ministry of Urban Heat Islands. I mean, I've just learned that the NEA is also not exactly been around for that long. And there is no agency or no ministry really sort of the one that is responsible for urban heat islands. So this involves a number of agencies. And this is, in the early discussions of the project, especially also with NRF, one of the things is that came up is really that it needs a combined effort from multiple stakeholders. And getting these together and coordinating these efforts is actually a major undertaking. And I'll mention this later, but one of the main deliverables, in a sense, that we have in the Cooling Singapore project is this Urban Heat Island Task Force, which is sort of trying to, be kicking off this kind of coordination effort. This is just sort of what happens if the Singapore's population go up, because there has been this, this population white paper a couple of years ago, which also caused quite a bit of an outcry. This is not exactly a very scientific extrapolation, but I think it gives you an idea of what happens if we add more people to Singapore. At the moment, at least in here, we are on the tropical hot-wet line, and at the moment we have about an urban heat island effect of about 7 degrees. And if you add more people to Singapore, as I said, the population white paper spoke of 6.9 million, but if you talk to different people and different agencies, and there's also larger numbers already in discussion, and then you can easily see where things are heading. So for Singapore, the urban heat island effect is obviously important if they, since they have intentions to grow. Another thing is, I don't know whether you've seen this. This was an article on the Straits Times. It was actually published in other newspapers as well just recently, and that was based on this work by Estrada, Boatzen, and Toll, and they have been working on figuring out what's the impact, the economic impact of urban heat islands. Also in relation to the global climate change. And essentially their findings are that the urban heat island effect can have quite a significant impact on the economy of a city. So again, this is something that I think is very relevant for Singapore, especially Singapore is a city-state, so if the city is in trouble, then the whole nation is in trouble. So from this, I think generally urban heat island effects is getting more and more attention here in Singapore, and I guess elsewhere as well, and I think this article is just one example of that. So that is really just sort of pointing out again the urgency to look into this issue of urban heat island effects. And then what we try to do in the Cooling Singapore project is essentially three major things, and I've already mentioned some of them. The first one is, of course, a roadmap with mitigation measures. So in a sense, what we are trying to do with this is we try to provide actionable knowledge for the decision makers. So we're not telling them what to do and how they have to develop the city, Ultimately, they have to decide on their own, but we want to be able, we want to give them knowledge that we will put together in this roadmap that will help them to make better informed decisions. That's sort of the idea behind it. And then this part here, roadmap for R&D, is something that was particularly highlighted by the NRF during the early discussions about cooling Singapore. For them, the question is, if we really want to tackle this urban heat island problem here in Singapore, this challenge, then there's also the question is, where are we lacking? What sort of knowledge gaps do we have? What are the technology gaps? And where is probably research funding wisely spent? So I think this is something that they are very interested in. And then the third one I already mentioned is the Urban Heat Island Task Force, which mainly consists of agency partners. We have, I think, all major agencies involved in the task force. I'll mention a bit more about this later. But we have also colleagues, for instance, from A*STAR and also NUS, Professor Wong, for instance, involved. And it's really the idea is to bring all the sort of experts from the different agencies, but also from, I mentioned NUS and A*STAR, together in this one group where we can have workshops, regular workshops, and exchange information and sort of also learn a bit more about the constraints that they have, perhaps from a regulatory point of view. Because, as I said, the idea is here to develop a roadmap, so we really need to sort of understand the regulatory framework which we're working in. Just briefly about the project itself, we have roughly 4 sort of components or work packages, if you like. The first is about science and facts, and this is very much about mapping, heat mapping. It's about taking the data, taking the facts, what we have, and try to generate heat maps. I'll give some examples. And then, of course, the work package 2 was also mentioned earlier. This is where SMART is heavily involved. This is about designing gaps, and that's really focusing on mitigation strategies. The third one is on policy, and this is really on sharing insights in the roadmap development. This work package in particular is very much also about the Urban Heat Island Task Force. So with one of my colleagues, Constant van Aerschot, so he's really busy talking to the agencies, keep communicating with them, and it's getting them together. That's quite a major effort. And then the fourth work package is actually hasn't started yet. It will start a little later. This is about prototype development, and here we're currently thinking along the lines of web-based applications and visualizations. And the idea is that these web-based applications would go together with the final reports and the mitigation strategy reports, what we will produce until the end of the project. So you will get printed material, but there will also be sort of an online version, which is more interactive and I guess more fun to use. Okay, just I give you a rough sort of walkthrough of the sort of thinking that we have. It's generally a multi-scale approach, and I'll just give you an idea. So from the macroscopic scale, of course, I won't go into the details of solar irradiation and thermal storage. We heard of this before. Of course, the anthropogenic component is also very important. So this is a Sankey diagram showing essentially what happens with the energy that is imported into Singapore. And obviously, we want to know where the energy is being consumed, or where it's used, and where heat is being generated. So here, on this level, it's very much about the energy balance, and there is no. I put temporal into brackets because actually we could have especially here, of course, you have a temporal pattern there, but there's no spatial resolution, and this is important to sort of estimate the total UHI in terms of energy. But then, of course, it's also more important to know where are things happening. Where's things happening? So, for instance, as I said, we don't have a spatial resolution here, but then would be on the mesoscale. This is essentially where we have those heat maps, and these would be essentially tempospatial distributions of in this case, energy usage. That gives us a better idea of where it's basically about the anthropogenic component of the urban heat island effect. And this, if it works, the video. that should... Well, it would show you the traffic. Unfortunately, it seems it's not working. But essentially, it gives them one example of sort of like the temporal-spatial distribution of energy consumption in the traffic. So you would see in the morning rush hours, you get a peak. And then, of course, in the evening rush hour, when lots of traffic is on the way. This is about the buildings. This is, I should mention this. This is based on work by colleagues from TUM Create and also a former colleague from FCL, Matthias Berger. You may know him. So this is again about the energy fluxes, but on the buildings. And then on a micro scale, I guess it's really on the neighborhood level. We've heard already about Orchard. In Orchard, the anthropogenic component of the urban heat island is actually quite high because of the density and the energy consumption there. And then, of course, when we come to the micro scale, this is also the importance for the outdoor thermal comfort. At the beginning, we had this discussion: is this project just about urban heat island effects, or should we also talk about? Should we also look into outdoor thermal comfort? And at least to me, this all goes together. I mean, obviously, urban heat islands is at some point affecting the outdoor thermal comfort. So, of course, this would be then on a much smaller scale than if you just look at the. Oh, I think I pressed the wrong button. Let me just get back. Yeah. So this is also something that we look at. And I mentioned here a measurement engagement campaign. So this is something that we are currently planning to do. And we will probably carry this out sometime in between August and October. I'll get to the timeline later. But basically the idea is that we wanted we thought, okay, if we want to think about outdoor thermal comfort, then the best thing is we should actually go out there and talk to people, conduct surveys, and collect data. The measurement campaign will also have sort of check and balance kind of a function because we're currently also using the National Science Experiment data, which I think some of you are already familiar with. The problem with this data is that these are some handheld sort of sensors that are being used by students, primary, secondary school students, and there's a big question about how reliable this data is. So we wanted to take some of these data, bring our own sensors, and just get a better idea of how much we can trust. And at the same time, interview people and get a better idea of the qualitative or intangible aspects of it. So for instance, perceived control is one component, intangible. So that's essentially how much do you have choice to walk somewhere where it's in the sun or where it's shaded. Also the expectation, of course, plays a big role. If you're expecting that it's going to be warm, then of course if it does actually make you sweat, then you probably still don't feel as uncomfortable because you were expecting it. So we're trying to get a better idea of outdoor thermal comfort, but at the same time then relate this to the urban environment. So we'll be looking into probably in the CBD area. There will be some measurements be done in an HDB area. To get a variety of sites. Okay, so as I said, the project sort of started at the beginning of the year and is well underway. We have been, in fact, the last 2 weeks, I would say, it's extremely busy for us because just 2 weeks ago we had our Cooling Singapore launch. That is a bit strange, perhaps, because the project started at the beginning of the year, but we had the launch event only mid-year. And the reason for that is that the NRF urged us to only do this once we have assembled this Urban Heat Island Task Force, because this is really an important aspect of the project. And it took us a while to get all the agencies together and essentially form this task force. That's the reason why the launch was only 2 weeks ago. And then just next Monday, we will have the first workshop, the first Cooling Singapore workshop, and the focus on of this workshop will be the mitigation catalog that has been prepared over the last few months by my colleagues. And then, as I said, around between August and October, we will conduct this measurement and survey and an engagement campaign. There will be another workshop towards the end of the year, which will most likely focus on the tools that are being used to evaluate different mitigation strategies. And yeah, but at the moment, it's really, that's the next big thing. So I think everyone is extremely busy at the moment preparing for the Monday workshop. And then this is just an excerpt, just to give an idea of how this catalog actually looks like. This is only a draft, and it's obviously a lot more pages than this, but this is just an example, a sampler, if you like, of this mitigation strategies catalog. So we will have a comprehensive catalog giving an overview of all different kinds of mitigation strategies, and the focus here is tropical climate. So we have only included those strategies that are really relevant in the context of Singapore. And then for next year, we will have, at the beginning of the year, it's planned that we have our scientific advisory committee visiting us. And then because of that, we will probably also have a third workshop there, which makes sense since they're around. And then mid-year is going to be very, very important because there will be the World City Summit, and we are planning to attend. So we're currently in discussion with the World City Summit organizers to have Cooling Singapore prominently included in the program. And this is month 18 of the project, and this is also sort of the end of the main part of the project. The project is actually 24 months, but over the last 6 months, it's really mostly developing those tools and those prototypes that I've mentioned earlier. So most of the work will happen during the first 18 months, and this is why it just nicely coincides with the World City Summit. So this is why this is a really important month for us. This was just an overview of the project. And I'd just like to highlight again the people that are involved. We have in total 8 PIs, and one of them, and then Leslie Norford, of course, is one of them, and also Li Shancheng. And then we have in total 16 people on the team. We also have a couple of interns. And I just want to highlight the smart people. You probably already know them. Juan Angel Acero, Gloria Pinata, and Mohamed Omer Mughal. This is the team from SMART, and then we have roughly equally sort of distributed the manpower across the different institutions. We have also a number of people involved from the FCL, from the Future Cities Lab. They are strictly speaking not part of the Cooling Singapore project, but they are still part of the whole Cooler, Calmer Singapore sort of initiative that we've been working on at FCL. So by all means, they are, in practical terms, part of the project as well. So there's quite a number of people there. Okay, this is one overview. I think there's some time for some quick questions.
Yes.
I think without the microphone. So I have a question regarding how much of the heat island effect is due to changes in vegetation and albedo and those factors, and how much of it is due to this emission of anthropogenic heat from buildings and traffic. Do you have a sense for that?
Yeah, this is exactly one of the things that we're trying to really get an idea of what exactly is the problem. I mean, obviously...
So that's not known?
Well, it depends. So if you're in a high-density area, then the anthropogenic part plays a big role. Obviously, if you're in a less dense area, then the anthropogenic part is actually not that high. So for instance, in the area where the flux tower is, Matthias Roth, they have just published a paper on this, and there the anthropogenic part is actually pretty negligible. So it's really mostly about the heat storage from the incoming solar radiation.
Because I think understanding that would dictate what kind of strategies you need to look at, right?
Yes, this is exactly the part of the work package one where we try to do this heat mapping so that we get a better idea of sort of the areas that we should look at, but also the components, whether it's more the anthropogenic component or the solar irradiation part, for instance.
And also, I think if the latter is the case, if the reduced vegetation, for example, is the factor, then we have to be very careful because in defining what is cooling. Because if you increase vegetation, you may get the urban heat island effect down, but you may get humidity.
Yes.
and so you don't impact the
Yeah, so then this also affects the outer thermal comfort, right?
Yeah.
So this is why I said I think this is all part of one bigger picture. And what we're trying to do is sort of tackle it from a holistic point of view. But yes, we're still working on the sort of the findings and the outcomes.